As Hanley said, I'm Joe McInerney. I work at HAO at NCAR, and I'm going to go through WACCM-X and the CESM. Hanley and I have been working on getting WACCM-X and the CESM for a little while, so we've finally achieved that earlier this year. So Sean's gone through the CESM. He went and talked about what's done there, and then you just heard from Dan going through WACCM, giving details of how WACCM fits into the CESM, and I'm going to go through WACCM-X, show how it fits in with those two and how they all blend together. So WACCM-X is included when you download the CESM, the capabilities there, and that was as Sean said, back in February with CESM 1.04. The basic workflow that Sean described, it all applies to WACCM-X. So when you can digest what he's done, it's going to apply the same thing, and I'll mention a little bit about that later. The release only has one validated WACCMX case now, and I'll describe what that is. Sean's already mentioned that, and Dan mentioned that a little bit, but I'll go through those details a little bit more. This case has a comp set called F2000 WACCM-X. The resolution is the 1.9 by 2.5 resolution for all the components. It is built from the F2000 WACCM comp set that Dan mentioned. So really, if you think about it, it's really just another WACCM case that's in the CESM. And it's perpetual year 2000 atmosphere and land. It has the prescribed ocean, sea ice, and its solar maximum, just as the F2000 WACCM case. One difference is that in the WACCM-X case, we use quiet geomagnetic conditions, which means we set the KP and the AP lower. That was higher in the WACCM case. So that's one difference between the F2000 and F2000 WACCM-X as far as the configuration goes. And then I'm going to go back and tell you where you can specify to run WACCM-X, and you've seen this before from both Sean and Dan. They've gone through this. It's at this create new case stage, and so you right here, Sean showed this. You use a command called create new case, and here you'll specify the options for WACCM-X. The minus case just specifies the directory. The resolution for the WACCM-X comp set is the 1.9, 2.5. The comp set's called F2000 WACCM-X. And this example I'm giving is for the Blue Fire machine at NCAR. So you just give it a machine name of Blue Fire. And then this creates, as Sean said, this creates, and Dan mentioned this too, this creates a case directory. And so you have your case directory, and you can do exactly as Sean described. From creating the case on, you can go through all the rest of the steps that he mentioned, and you'll have output for this WACCM-X case. But a question that is probably a good question to ask is, what if you want a different WACCM-X comp set or a different WACCM-X case? What if you want to do something different than just the solar maximum perpetual run? So I'm going to go through, talk about how you can go, how you could do this. So one way you could do it is you just could wait for a later CESM release and see what WACCM-X cases pop up later on, and that's probably not the best way to do it. Or you could jump in and just try to create a WACCM-X case from an existing WACCM case. And it's surprisingly straightforward how you can do this. So here's the steps you'd go through to, there's 4 of them that you'd go through to go from a WACCM case to a WACCM-X case. The first thing you do is you could just create a WACCM case just like you would if you were trying to run WACCM. That's with that create new case command that I mentioned just a little while ago, which is in the CESM download scripts directory. And here's a list of the WACCM cases that Dan had this list. I just kind of summarized it a little bit. And what I've done here is I've highlighted in blue these cases here, which are cases which Hanley and I have taken WACCM cases and made WACCM-X cases from those. And you can see this is a familiar one here. That one is the one that's in the release. The 1955-2005 is something that we've been running simulations with. So there are some that we've done this with, and then of course Fabrizio has done some stuff with this SD WACCM, which I didn't include there, but I probably should have, since that appears to be working right now. But if you want details about these comp sets and which one you might want to modify and make a WACCMX case out of, you can just go back and look at Dan's tutorial, the WACCM tutorial, and look at the details of those and choose one you want. So after you've created a WACCM case, you've chose the WACCM case you want. You've done a create new case. You've got this case directory. Then there's this ENV comp file, which Sean mentioned and Dan mentioned, and this sits in this case directory. And so what you would do is just like Dan was describing, you can edit this file. And what I've done here is I've given the original, this is the original WACCM ENV comp, and then the modified WACCMX ENV comp file. And I just have two entries here in this XML file that need to be changed to go from WACCM to WACCMX. The first of those is to change the number of times that you couple the atmosphere component with the other components in the model. And this has to do with the time step. We need a shorter time step in WACCMX, so we have to change this to tell it to couple more times per day with the other components. The other thing that you'll need to do here is add this WACCMX configure option, and that's what this is right here. And you add it into this cam config ops entry in this XML file. So once you do those two, you're done with the ENV comp file, and now we can move on and create a, yeah.
Can you go back one slide? You changed also the chemistry.
Oh.
V1, there is no V1 at all.
Oh, here?
Yeah.
Anybody know why?
It doesn't matter.
Okay, they're the same.
V1 is the frozen chemistry that was used for the CEDAR 5, I believe. And then standard WACCM looks out for V1 is it have more, maybe slightly updated chemistry or slightly different.
Okay.
Say a new JBL rate or something.
Okay.
You could run either for WACCM, for WACCMX, it wouldn't matter.
Okay.
It's not a critical change.
Okay, so the next step to get a WACCMX case from a WACCM case is to play with this or edit this user NL-CAM file. And Sean mentioned that and Dan mentioned that. Dan showed some modifications you can do to that file, but it's a new file that you will edit and create here in this case directory. And so this is a listing, and you can see that there's ENV conf in here. So you'll just create it in here, and you start filling that with what is needed to go from WACCM to WACCMX. And this user NL CAM is just a user specified name list file. And then Dan, like I said, Dan talked about that in the WACCM tutorial. So if you want to get more information about that, you can look at what he did with that. So for WACCMX, you just jump in here and start modifying and adding some WACCM name list variables and put them into this file. And this is, the blue is what the file is going to look like. The first thing you're going to do is specify, as Dan said, there's this CAM imparm, which just implies you're doing something related to the atmosphere part of the model. The first thing that's changed in WACCMX is we changed the insplit. We use an insplit of 6, which helps with the stability of the model, and that's just the relative number of time steps the dynamics does versus the physics. And so the value to use for WACCMX is a 6. The next thing you change is the time step. The D time is the time step here. WACCM uses and CAM uses a half an hour time step, and we're using a 5-minute time step. We've done some playing around with a 15-minute time step, but for now, just changing this to 5 minutes is the safest thing to do. And then here is the last changed WACCM entry, and that's this NC data file, which is the initial conditions file that Dan mentioned. Of course, WACCMX needs a different initial conditions file because the number of levels that it has. So this is the file that's in the use case that's in the release. So one new nameless variable that's been added for WACCM-X is this WACCM-X opt, and this is a runtime switch just to tell the model, you know, we're going to be running a WACCM-X version of the model, and that's needed to tell it that's what you want to do. So this is the whole user NLCam that you would need, and that's the basic things you would need. There's some optional things that Hanley and I have found that we change more often than others, and so I just listed some of those here. But if you go back to the WACCM tutorial, it will tell you more about those. And so one remaining question here is WACCM-X requires different initial condition files than WACCM. So where do you get those initial conditions files? And those have to be created individually for each WACCM case. For each WACCM case, it has an individual file, and for each WACCM-X case, you'll have to create an individual file, and we've done some of that. But that's the next step here, is to get the appropriate initial conditions file for the WACCM-X case that you're creating. So here's some information about the initial conditions files. The CESM release includes just one, and that's that F2000 WACCM-X initial condition file that I just showed. We've gotten some initial condition files made for some runs that we've done, a solar minimum run, and then this 1955-2005 run. So we have some, but those files are not in the CESM, they're not in the input data directory, and they don't come with the download. So the good news is that we can create WACCM-X initial condition files for any of the WACCM cases that you modify and want to use with WACCM-X. And it's not that time consuming of a thing to do. So we've gone through all these steps to go from a WACCM case to a WACCM-X case, and we've gone through all the modifications you need to make to the case. And so then from there, you just do the same thing that Sean described for the CESM. You just go through the rest of the procedures there, go through the workflow of configure, build, and run, and then you'll have output for that WACCM-X comp set that's similar to that WACCM case. And so this is an overview of what I've just gone through. WACCM-X is now in the CESM download. The basic workflow for WACCM-X is the same as for the CESM. There's one WACCM-X case currently available in CESM. WACCM-X case can be created by a user from any WACCM case, just going through these 4 steps that I described. For number 4, that's the one open end in the whole process. You need to get your hands on an initial conditions file. And there's some available that I mentioned. There's probably some other ones that Hanley and I have created for different purposes and haven't done any long-term runs with. So there's some that exist. But for any of them, if you want to take a stab at trying to create a WACCM-X case from a WACCM case, we can get you some initial conditions file that will work for you. And there's my email. If you wanted to try it and get a file, you can email me, and I can give you something that should work. But as Dan mentioned, and Sean mentioned, the best place to go for any problems, questions is this bulletin board, and that's it.